There exists a quiet and profound beauty in the things that fall apart, a silent wisdom that speaks not of ruin, but of return. We are conditioned to seek permanence, to build structures of life and love and identity that we believe should withstand the relentless current of time. We celebrate the polished, the new, the whole. Yet in our periphery, the world offers a more ancient and honest teaching. It speaks in the curling edges of a dried leaf, a map of its own slow surrender. It whispers in the flaking paint of an old house where each peeling layer reveals a former life, a different color, a ghost of what once was. It manifests in the way an apple, sliced open and exposed to the air, accepts its own browning, its inevitable return to the elements. These are not signs of failure. They are not flaws in the system. They are the system itself unfolding with a grace we have been taught to fear. Decay is not an adversary. It is the fundamental rhythm of the universe, the exhale that follows every inhale of creation. To truly understand this is to move beyond a mere intellectual assent. It is to feel it in the body, in the loosening of a clenched jaw, the softening of a perpetually tense shoulder, the quiet permission to simply be without the exhausting obligation to forever remain. When we stop resisting this universal law, a profound calm descends. It is the peace of the fallen log in the forest, which in its slow, unprotesting collapse becomes a universe of its own, a home for insects, a nursery for fungi, a source of rich nourishment for the soil that will birth the next generation of trees. The log does not mourn its lost height or its vanished canopy. It simply gives itself back, completing a cycle with a silent dignity that we in our frantic preservation of self rarely afford ourselves. Consider the rusted gate, its iron latticework bleeding a deep, earthy orange. Our first instinct is to see neglect a failure of maintenance. We think of corrosion of weakness, of something that has lost its intended form. But what if we saw it instead as an honest collaboration? Rust is what happens when iron, water, and air convene and decide to create something new. It is not destruction, it is transformation. It is time made visible, a testament to every storm it has weathered, every morning dew that has settled upon its surface. The gate's story is no longer one of simple utility, but of endurance and change. Its beauty is not in its pristine, unblemished state, but in the rich, textured narrative of its existence. It has lived. We walk past these teachers every day, our minds too cluttered with the pursuit of the permanent to notice the lessons in the ephemeral. We see fallen petals and think of a flower's death, not the completion of its bloom. We see a worn-out pair of shoes and think useless, not of the thousands of steps they have carried someone through the journeys they have silently witnessed. We have been trained to equate dissolution with loss. But what if we began to see it as a form of stripping away a process that removes the non-essential to reveal a deeper truth? People who have experienced profound loss often speak with a startling clarity. They have been through the fire of disintegration and have seen what remains when everything else is burned away. What remains is not material, not status, not even identity in its most rigid form. What remains is a core of being, a quiet knowing, a profound connection to the essence of life that cannot be taken. This knowing, though born of pain, is grounding. It is the solid earth beneath the shifting sands of experience. It teaches that our frantic efforts to preserve the surface are often a distraction from cultivating the depths. To learn from decay is to learn patience. In our world of instant fixes and overnight results, decay teaches the long rhythm. Mold does not appear the moment fruit is left on the counter. The change begins invisibly, a slow softening, a subtle shift in chemistry. Over days, it transforms the whole. This is the rhythm of seasons, of lifetimes, of the cosmos itself. It is a pace that is deeply out of sync with our modern anxieties, and yet it is the pace of reality. To align with it is to let go of the need for immediate resolution, to find peace in the gradual unfolding, to trust the process even when its progress is imperceptible. Furthermore, decay is a profound teacher of humility. It reminds us that we are not separate from the natural world. We are woven from the very same fabric. No matter how strong our bodies feel today, they are subject to the same laws as the leaf and the log. Our hair will gray, our skin will soften, our voices will quiet. To see this not as a tragedy, but as life honoring its own promise is a radical act of acceptance. It is to say, I too am part of this flow. I too will be given back. This is not a morbid fascination. It is an embrace of the whole of life, not just the convenient, youthful, vibrant parts. It is a recognition that there is a sacredness in every stage of the journey. This is why old objects often feel sacred to us. A grandmother's worn book, its pages soft as cloth, carrying the faint scent of her home. A faded photograph, a ghost of a moment that has long since passed yet still radiates a presence. A cracked teacup mended with gold in the Japanese art of kintsugi, which celebrates breakage as part of an object's history. We revere these things not because they are perfect, but precisely because they are not. They have lasted long enough to fall apart, and in their beautiful brokenness, they carry the texture of time. You touch them, and you feel the presence of all the hands that held them before all the stories that soaked into their very being. There's a reverence in that, a connection to a lineage of experience. If you are always trying to preserve, to keep things untouched, to stop them from changing, you are engaged in a fight you will never win, and that fight is the source of immense suffering. The flowers will wilt, the roof will leak, the skin will wrinkle, and yet life will go on. Beauty will remain just a different kind of beauty, a quieter, softer, more honest one. A beauty that has earned its lines, its scars, its gentle fading. Look again at the rust. It is not just at a breakdown. It is a slow, honest transformation. The kind you cannot fake, the kind that doesn't need to impress anyone. When you learn to sit with this process in the world around you, something in you begins to shift. You stop needing everything in your own life to be new, untouched, flawless. You begin to see value in wear and tear, in things that have been used, loved, and weathered, because those things tell the truth. They don't pretend to be anything they are not. They just are. Watching decay can even help you heal from grief, not by erasing the pain, but by helping you understand that endings are not a cosmic error. They are natural. The ache you feel when something ends is not a punishment. It is the irrefutable proof that it mattered. It is the echo of love, the shadow of a connection that was real. And once you can see that, you can begin to let go, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, heartbreaking grace. There's something deeply human about loving things that are falling apart. A chipped mug you refuse to throw out, an old sweater with holes you still wear, a face lined with age that feels more alive than any smooth surface ever could. This is where the heart speaks not in the language of perfection, but in the language of memory, presence, and tenderness. This practice of watching decay is not about becoming cold or detached. It is the opposite. It is about softening your grip so you can hold the present moment more gently, more fully. When you know in your bones that it will not last, you finally begin to pay attention. You stop taking things for granted. You savor, and in that savoring, life becomes immeasurably deeper, fuller, and more real. Control is often just fear in a socially acceptable disguise. The fear that if you don't hold on with all your might, everything will slip away. But watching decay shows you that things will slip away no matter what. And that is not a failure. In its own way, it is a mercy. Because when things fall apart, space is made. New growth becomes possible. The forest floor covered in dead leaves and fallen branches is not a graveyard. It is the rich, dark, fertile soil where the future is already dreaming itself into being. You don't have to love the process of losing, but you can learn to respect it. You can walk through it with open eyes, knowing that you are not being punished. You are being returned to the truth, to stillness, to what is real beneath all the noise. That is the gift of decay. It humbles, it heals, it simplifies. And here's the quiet miracle: when you really take this in, not just once, but over and over, you begin to suffer less. You begin to breathe through change instead of fighting it. You begin to let go before life forces your hand. And that gentle, knowing surrender, that is the beginning of peace. The day ends. The sun lowers its gaze, and what's left behind is not just silence or rest, but an invitation. An invitation to turn inward, not to escape the world, but to finally notice the one that has been moving inside you all along. The external world slows its relentless pace, but within the landscape of the self, something continues to move. Thoughts linger like ghosts in an empty room. Feelings rise like steam from a hot spring, and yet most of them pass without a name, without a voice, without a chance to be seen. What if the tension in your chest was not just anonymous stress? What if the heavy eyes, the tight jaw, or the sudden bone-deep tiredness had a story your conscious mind has not yet told? Beneath the surface of your awareness, an entire emotional ecosystem is always flowing, not loud, not obvious, but constant. These are the unseen currents, the subtle emotions that arrive and depart in quiet waves. Sometimes they leave a residue, a faint film of unease or a whisper of melancholy. Other times they vanish before you have even registered their presence. This is the space where so much of our suffering begins. Not from the grand dramatic emotions we can easily label grief, rage, elation, but from the vast unacknowledged territory of what we never pause to fully feel. And yet it is precisely here, in this quiet, unseen river, that our deepest healing can also begin. So much of our inner world operates on what could be called invisible time. These are not the emotions you speak of at the dinner table, not the ones you can neatly categorize or share in a text message. They are the brief shadows that pass through a room, the flickers of feeling behind a sigh, the momentary, inexplicable unease that makes you snap at someone you love or pull away without knowing why. They arrive as signals, as quiet emissaries from your deeper self. But when left unnamed, unheard, and unfelt, they grow roots in the silence. They begin to manifest sideways, showing up as habits you don't understand, as choices you later question, or as a profound exhaustion that doesn't seem to match the events of your day. This is the cost of ignoring these unnamed visitors. They tend to stay longer when you don't greet them at the door. Most of us walk through life as if we are responding only to what is happening outside of us, unaware that our every reaction is being shaped, colored, and driven by what is happening inside, often without the benefit of language. That is what makes these subtle emotions so powerful. You are not avoiding them out of weakness or denial. You simply don't realize they are there. They move too quietly, slipping beneath the floorboards of your awareness like wind under a door. But here's a remarkable truth. The simple act of bringing gentle, non-judgmental attention to this hidden current begins to change its nature. You don't need to dissect every feeling or turn your heart into an intellectual puzzle to be solved. You just need to notice. To pause for a single conscious breath and ask with genuine curiosity, what am I feeling right now underneath this moment? Not what you are thinking, what you are feeling. Even if you cannot name it right away, the inquiry itself is a profound act of self-reclamation. The body is often the first to know, but the first to speak, long before the mind has a chance to translate a feeling into a coherent narrative. The body registers it. It speaks in its own subtle, ancient language, a lump in the throat, a knot in the stomach, a strange, sudden urge to clean something, to organize, to leave the room. Before a thought formulates, the body speaks in sensations, in weight, in warmth, in chill, in tightness, in openness. If you can begin to pay attention to these somatic signals without the immediate need to explain them away or fix them, you start to build a bridge between the visible world of your thoughts and the invisible world of your feelings. You create a dialogue between what you know and what you merely sense. This is not about fixing your emotions. It is about allowing them to complete their natural life cycle. It is about letting them pass through you, like clouds through an open sky. You don't have to hold on to them, and you don't have to push them away. You simply bear witness to their arising and their passing. That is how they remain small and manageable. When you ignore or cling to an unnamed feeling, it tends to stretch and distort into something else, something louder and more demanding. A flicker of disappointment left unfelt can curdle into a day-long mood of irritation. A moment of fear pushed down can fester into pervasive anxiety. A flash of resentment ignored can solidify into a hardened grudge. But at its inception, it was only a brief flicker, something light enough to float away if you had only noticed it without judgment. Many of the emotions that trouble us arise not from the present moment, but from the undigested leftovers of previous ones. That awkward encounter from 5 days ago, the quiet resentment you didn't voice last week, the fear you carried all through the month but kept covering up with endless distractions. They do not simply disappear because you didn't talk about them. They change shape, they find new exits, and without your awareness, they quietly begin to steer the wheel of your life. When you start to name what you feel, even with just a whisper of internal attention, you interrupt that unconscious pattern. The emotion becomes a visitor, not the driver of the car. It doesn't need to take over the entire house. It simply needs to be acknowledged, to be felt, and then to be allowed to leave on its own time. Some of the most powerful emotional shifts in a person's life happen when they begin to notice the gap, however infinitesimally small at first, between a feeling and their reaction to it. That space is where freedom lives. Most people miss it entirely. They feel something, a prick of insecurity, a flash of anger, and they immediately respond with a conditioned reflex defensiveness, blame, withdrawal, avoidance. But when you begin to recognize the feeling before the reaction, you create a sacred pause, a breath, a choice, and that is when true peace begins. Not when you stop feeling, but when you stop reacting without knowing why. Even joy has its unnamed layers. That sudden, unbidden burst of energy from a piece of music. That lightness in your step when you see someone you care about. That quiet, expansive feeling of contentment when you look at a sunset. Sometimes you don't notice these moments either, not because they are painful, but because they are brief and subtle. You miss them while you are busy chasing bigger, louder, more dramatic feelings. But if you learn to stop and feel them fully, to let that quiet joy land in your body, you will find that your life is already far richer than you imagined. Joy, like grief, often visits in quiet, short waves. We tend to think that emotions need words to be real, but many of them don't. They only need space. They need breath. They need you to pause without judgment and simply be with them. Naming can be a powerful tool, yes, but presence is what truly allows them to move. Being with them, not analyzing them, is the key. It's helpful to think of your inner world like a river. Some parts of it are loud and crashing the big obvious feelings, like heartbreak, rage, or elation. But underneath that surface turmoil, there's always a deeper, slower current. This is where the subtle emotions reside, the ones you may have carried for years without knowing, the ones that speak not in words, but in patterns in how you sleep, how you speak, how you hold yourself when you think no one is watching. And the most beautiful thing is that this current can change, not by force, but by gentle, consistent awareness. Each time you sit quietly with yourself and ask, what is here right now? You are clearing the water. You are letting what has been stuck begin to move again. You are creating a life where you don't just function. You feel, and you begin to understand what you feel. There is no need to become an expert in your own pain to build a perfect emotional vocabulary. You are simply trying to soften to notice, to make space inside your life for the feelings that have been hiding behind productivity, perfectionism, and pressure. Sometimes, all it takes is one breath, one question asked gently to yourself. Is this feeling mine, or is this something I picked up along the way? You will be surprised how often the answer is that it was never yours to hold in the first place. Perhaps it came from your family, from your culture, from a story you were told that you were never allowed to question. But when you name it, when you feel it, it begins to lose its grip. There's profound freedom in admitting to yourself, I don't know exactly what I'm feeling right now, because in that honesty, you open a door. You say to your inner self, whatever this is, I am willing to be with it. And that is when things start to move, not through force, but through permission. The goal is not to avoid these invisible feelings. The goal is to feel them early gently before they gather momentum and turn into something heavier. It is like noticing a cool breeze before it becomes a storm. It is far easier to open a window than to repair a shattered wall. And that is what this practice offers you: early awareness, gentle intervention. Over time, you will notice that even old, deeply buried emotions start to rise to the surface. Grief you thought you had processed, fear you had forgotten about, a deep tenderness you didn't know you still possessed. And you will learn to hold them without needing to explain them away. You will learn to trust that whatever comes up will also pass, because that is what emotions do when you stop trapping them in the prison of silence. Even when you wake up in a bad mood and don't know why, this awareness can become your anchor. You pause, you breathe, you remind yourself, something is moving through me. And instead of fighting it or letting it ruin your day, you watch it with a gentle curiosity. You trust that you are not broken. You are simply feeling. This level of emotional presence does not necessarily make life easier, but it makes it truer. You will still feel anger, sadness, and shame, but they will no longer own you. They will not define your day. They will visit you, will greet them, and they will leave because you have finally learned just to let them. After the interior world has been acknowledged, after you have begun to listen to the unseen river within your awareness can open even further. This time, it expands not just to what is happening inside you, but to what has always been all around you, the world's quiet, persistent way of showing you how to let go without fear. There's a form of peace that does not come from fixing anything, from solving the puzzle of your life, or from achieving a state of permanent bliss. It comes from watching life move and shift again and again without ever for a single moment staying the same. This is the wisdom of the ephemeral, and its greatest classroom is the natural world. It starts with light. Watch how it shimmers briefly on the surface of water, then disappears. There's no grasping, no permanence, just a transient, luminous flicker. And yet, in that momentary dance, that flicker can show you everything you need to know about peace. Reflections on water are the most delicate of phenomena. They appear for a second, a perfect mirror of the sky, the trees, the clouds, and then a single ripple, a passing breeze, a shift in the angle of the sun, and they break apart into 1,000 shimmering fragments. The image you just saw is gone forever. It can never be precisely recreated, but that doesn't make it less beautiful. In fact, that is precisely what makes it beautiful. You are witnessing something that is not even attempting to stay. It is only here for a moment, and that moment, because it is so utterly fleeting, holds all of its magic. This is the kind of peace we are so often missing in our lives. Not the peace that comes from certainty and control, but the kind that arises from gracefully accepting the lack of it. Watching water teaches you how to stop holding on so tightly. When you observe the surface of a lake shifting with the wind, or the sun glinting on the ocean for just a heartbeat before vanishing, you are seeing something sacred. Not because it stays, but because it doesn't. This practice teaches you not just how to observe, but how to be. When you stop needing to hold the moment in place, to capture it, to possess it, you become part of its rhythm. You soften, you breathe with it, not against it. You are no longer struggling to control your experience. You are simply witnessing it unfold, and in that witnessing you find a profound and simple freedom. Clouds perform the same silent teaching every day. They drift across the sky, constantly changing shape, never holding one form for more than an instant. They do not announce when they will arrive, or how long they will stay. They don't apologize for blocking the sun or for turning a threatening gray. They are simply moving, dissolving, and reforming. You can stare at the same patch of sky for 5 minutes and see an entirely different world from one moment to the next. This gentle, ceaseless shifting is a powerful reminder that everything you experience internally, every thought, every emotion, every worry, will also move on if you allow it to. We fight our inner states, trying to nail them down, trying to hold on to the pleasant ones and banish the unpleasant ones. But clouds teach us the art of allowing. They are masters of the non-attached procession. Even the tide, that great engine of coastal life, does not resist change. It comes in, it goes out. It never tries to remain at high tide clinging to the shore. It never avoids the vulnerability of low tide exposing the seabed. It surrenders to the gravitational pull of a distant moon over and over again in a rhythm that has defined our planet for eons. In that rhythm, there is an immense wisdom. There is no rush, no urgency, no need to be more or less than what it is. There is just a natural ebb and flow that always knows what to do next because it is not trying to do anything at all. It is simply responding. When you begin to watch nature, not as scenery, but as a teacher, your entire relationship to your own life begins to change. You start to notice how peace doesn't come from silence alone. It comes from presence, from being fully with what is without needing it to last or to look different. The dappled sunlight on a forest pond, dancing in patterns you could never design or predict, shows you that even the briefest beauty can be enough to sustain you. You don't need to own the moment to feel its power. You just need to be there for it. This understanding begins to change how you carry your past. You start to see your memories not as heavy, unchangeable monuments, but as reflections on water. They were real in their time, potent and vivid, but they are no longer something to be chased or desperately recreated. You don't have to grieve their passing forever. Like the way a cloud once looked exactly like a ship or a dragon before shifting into something formless, your memories shaped you, but they do not have to define your present. They can live in your heart like the memory of sunlight lives on water after the sun has set, a gentle warmth, a passing visitation, not a permanent fixture. Nature teaches the truth of impermanence without ever speaking a word. When you watch shadows move across the ground as the sun journeys across the sky, or when you follow the way light filters through the leaves of a tree, shifting with every breeze, you learn to hold space for things that are in a constant state of flux. You stop asking the world to freeze for you. You stop wishing for time to slow down or speed up. Instead, you begin to walk with time, gently, as you would with a friend. There's a deep and liberating peace in knowing that you don't need to understand everything. You don't need to catch every wave or name every cloud. You just need to remain open to what arrives. That openness allows life to surprise you, to soften you, to free you. You are not here on this earth to capture every moment in a jar. You are here to live through them, letting each one show you something you could not have found in any other way. This is not a philosophy of detachment or indifference. It is about connection without clinging. It is about loving fully without demanding permanence. When you stop holding things too tightly, you actually begin to feel them more deeply, because your fear of losing them no longer stands in the way, clouding the experience. Your senses open. The colors seem brighter, the sounds clearer, the textures more real. Watching moving water shows you what gentle acceptance looks like in practice. It flows around rocks, over roots, and past debris. It doesn't get stuck in indignation or frustration. It adapts, it yields, it finds another way, and somehow in that constant yielding movement, it always finds its way forward. Let that teach you something about your own life, about how you respond when things don't go as planned, about how you deal with obstacles, with loss, with change, with endings. When you realize that even the most beautiful reflections must fade, and that this is not a tragedy, but simply what they are meant to do, you stop resisting what comes next. you begin to feel a quiet peace in moments you would have previously overlooked. The way the morning light hits a wall and creates a slow-moving shape, the shadow of leaves swaying in the breeze on your floor, the way your own breath moves softly through your body when you pause to notice it. None of these moments last, but they don't need to. Their value is not in how long they stay, but in how fully you notice them while they are here. This is what ultimately anchors you. Not certainty, not control, but presence. The simple, radical decision to meet each moment as it is and then to let it go. When you live this way, you begin to trust that something new is always arriving, that no experience is ever wasted, that no feeling needs to be permanent to be meaningful. The world is full of these quiet reminders, the sparkle of dew on a spiderweb, the hush of wind through tall grass, the rhythmic dance of rain on a window pane. Each one shows you how to be alive without needing to hold the moment forever. That isn't weakness, that is the highest wisdom, and it makes your relationships deeper too. When you stop trying to make people or moments last forever, you begin to appreciate them for what they are right now. You speak more gently, you listen more fully, you realize that your undivided presence is the most generous and sacred gift you can possibly give, because it means you are not somewhere else in your mind grieving the past or fearing the future. You are right here with them now. Nature does not worry about what comes next. It doesn't ask, was that enough? It simply continues its unfolding with an unadorned grace. It gives you permission to stop performing, to stop rushing, to stop needing everything to add up to some grand conclusion. Sometimes the moment itself is enough, even if it is brief. Sometimes the sunlight only hits the water once in a particular way. Sometimes the wind shifts and the perfect reflection disappears. And that is okay. That is what makes peace possible. Not avoiding change, but embracing it, seeing it not as loss, but as life moving in its most natural, beautiful, and unstoppable way. You don't have to fight it. You don't have to explain it. You just have to let it in. And in letting it in, you will begin to notice something else too. You don't need as much as you thought you did. You don't need constant progress or final answers or perfect clarity. Sometimes all you need is a moment of stillness, a single conscious breath, a window with a view, a fleeting moment of sunlight. In that moment, though it passes, leaves it something behind a quiet imprint, a small shift in your being, a memory not of what you held, but of what you bravely let go. Even the smallest, most overlooked moments we experience carry a weight and beauty that can anchor us to the present, yet they often vanish the second they arrive. There are pauses in the symphony of your life that disappear into the folds of memory before you've even registered their music. A breeze that crosses your skin with just the right temperature, a fleeting moment of pure, unbidden grace. The way a loved one says your name without thinking about it, a sound so familiar it becomes invisible, yet so laden with history and affection. A child's passing glance that holds a question so deep and wide you don't have an answer in time. These moments don't leave behind grand stories or dramatic memories. They leave behind traces, faint imprints on the soul barely felt, quickly forgotten, but profoundly real. They're not loud. They do not demand reflection, but they are where presence lives in its purest, most unadorned form. Every day, these micro moments pass through the fabric of your life like tiny shimmering sparks. Most of them vanish unnoticed, not because they lack meaning, but because they lack drama. In a world obsessed with milestones, achievements, and highlight reels, we forget that the vast majority of life happens between these punctuated events. The true texture of our existence is not found in the graduations, the weddings, or the promotions. It is woven from the millions of ordinary, interstitial moments that we so often overlook in our rush to get to the important parts. But these in-between moments are frequently where genuine connection, clarity, and spontaneous joy first appear. Consider the simple act of a sip of tea, not the whole cup, but the single moment the warmth touches your lips. The steam rises to meet your face and the flavor first registers on your tongue. Or the 2 seconds of silent eye contact with a stranger in a crowd, a shared unspoken acknowledgement of a shared human experience before a smile breaks, or you both look away. Or the sound of your own laugh erupting so unexpectedly that it surprises you, a pure expression of joy before your mind has a chance to analyze or contain it. None of these instances can be repeated in exactly the same way. Even if you try to recreate the perfect cup of tea, you will find it has changed. The temperature of the room, the angle of the light, the subtle rhythm of your own body, all are different. That is precisely what makes each micro moment so precious. And once you begin to see this clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. We are taught from a young age to aim for the big things, the grand celebrations, the monumental achievements, the bold, life-altering changes. But the fabric of a good life is not stitched from these grand occasional events. It is woven from the delicate, everyday threads of the ordinary things we overlook. The way your hands feel while folding warm laundry, a simple, repetitive motion that connects you to the rhythm of care and home. The faint, sweet scent of something baking down the hallway, a smell that momentarily transports you to another time, another memory. The physical sensation of laying your head on your pillow at just the right angle, a moment of complete and utter surrender at the end of a long day. You may never notice these specific sensations again, but you were there for them. They happened. They mattered. This heightened awareness does not just sharpen your attention, it fundamentally softens your heart. You begin to discover beauty in places you used to rush past, treating them as mere transitions to something better. A door left slightly ajar, letting in just a sliver of hallway light that cuts a dramatic shape across the dark room. The feeling of profound quiet in a house right after everyone has left, a silence that is not empty but full of presence. The very first second after you wake up, that sacred liminal space before your thoughts and worries and to-do lists come rushing in. These are moments that hold no narrative, but they offer a depth of experience that words can never fully hold. The practice of noticing micro moments is not another task to add to your list, another form of mindfulness to chase and achieve. It is not a task at all. It is an openness, a kind of gentle listening that happens without effort once you give it permission. You don't need to do anything extra. You simply need to stop skipping ahead. You need to consent to stay in the part of your life that is happening right now, even if, and especially if it feels like nothing of importance is happening at all. This subtle shift in awareness fundamentally changes your relationship with time. Life begins to feel longer, more spacious, not because more events are happening, but because you are finally present for the richness of what is already happening. When you are aware of these tiny, fleeting instances, you stretch time in a way that creates more depth without needing more hours in the day. A single, fully inhabited minute can feel more expansive than a distracted hour. You will also find that a sense of appreciation begins to grow naturally, without force. Gratitude becomes less of a mental list you have to compile and more of a constant felt presence. You stop needing big reasons to feel thankful. You feel it simply because you are awake to the symphony of small graces you used to sleep through. That moment when your favorite song unexpectedly starts to play on the radio. The brief, charged stillness in the air just before a thunderstorm breaks. A stranger holding the door for you just a second longer than necessary. It is all alive with a quiet, unassuming magic. Even difficult days begin to offer something more than just hardship. Not because they become pleasant, but because they too contain flashes of unexpected tenderness. A shared knowing glance with someone else who is also in pain. A single deep breath that manages to steady your trembling heart. The simple, profound warmth of a shower after a hard, emotional moment. These tiny gifts do not remove the weight of the difficulty, but they add small, luminous points of light that can guide you through it. Micro moments can also be a powerful antidote to disconnection. So many of our conflicts, regrets, and emotional distances are rooted in the simple habit of absence. We are physically present, but our minds are elsewhere. We don't truly hear what people meant to say beneath their words. We miss their small tentative offerings of closeness. We overlook their quiet attempts to connect because we are waiting for a grand gesture. But when you start attuning yourself to the small moments, you start truly seeing people again. You recognize the hand placed lightly on your back as a profound gesture of support. You notice the extra 2 minutes someone waited for you without complaint. You hear the quiet patience in someone's voice when you are struggling. These are the love languages that no one ever talks about, but they are often the most sincere. And this works both ways. Your own small gestures, when offered with your full attention, become part of someone else's tapestry of micro moments. A conscious pause before you respond, showing that you are truly considering their words. A handwritten note left where it will be found unexpectedly. A soft good night, spoken with genuine warmth and presence. You do not need to perform grand acts to be present for others. You just need to mean it right here, right now. This way of living also frees you from the tyranny of perfectionism because micro moments are by their very nature not curated. They're not filtered. They are raw, imperfect, and fleeting, but they are honest. You don't need to be at your best to offer something real. Even your tired, weary sigh can carry a sense of connection if it is shared in a space of mutual presence. You will also start to notice how your inanimate surroundings hold micro moments of their own. The particular sound of a specific drawer closing in your kitchen, the way light flickers through leaves and casts dancing patterns on the wall, the way a candle flame flickers for a moment before it finally goes out. These are not mere backdrops to your life. They are an active part of your sensory experience. And when you stop treating them as noise, they start to feel like messages, like gentle, persistent nudges back towards stillness and presence. This kind of awareness does not slow you down in the way you might expect. It doesn't make you unproductive or lazy. It simply clears out the incessant mental clutter that steals your energy. Because when you stop ignoring life's smallest, most intimate moments, you stop needing constant external stimulation. You stop chasing intensity. You begin to learn how to receive the quiet nourishment that is already here waiting for you. There's also an immense sense of relief that comes with this practice. You realize you don't have to wait for the right time to feel whole. You don't have to reach a certain goal to feel grounded. You can feel it in the immediate now, even in the smallest possible version of it, even in a passing breeze, even in a moment of shared silence, even as we learn to inhabit the smallest moments to find presence in the fleeting and the subtle. We must also confront the moments that feel jarringly incomplete. Not every story concludes with a satisfying resolution. Not every sentence finds its period. Some voices go quiet before we are ready. Some questions hang in the air, forever unanswered, and some connections fray and dissolve without a final clarifying conversation. Life keeps moving, but the heart often lingers in these unfinished chapters, replaying them, rewriting them, longing for a closure that may never arrive. There is a quiet, specific ache that lives inside these unfinished conversations. The kind you keep replaying in your head in the dead of night, searching for a different outcome. The ones you wish you had handled with more wisdom, more courage, or more kindness. The ones that ended too soon, or perhaps never really ended at all, just faded into a prolonged, ambiguous silence. We carry their weight in subtle ways through a newfound hesitation in our relationships, through a chronic tension held deep in the body, through words we still practice in the silent theater of the mind, preparing for a stage that has long been dismantled. It is easy to believe that formal closure is the only path to peace, that we need that final talk, that definitive apology, that mutual understanding to finally let go. But there is another path, a softer, quieter, and ultimately more powerful one. It is the path of allowing things to be incomplete, allowing mysteries to remain mysteries, allowing the story to end in the middle. Not every relationship, no matter how significant, will reach a state of perfect clarity. Not every misunderstanding will be corrected. Not every apology owed will be given. Sometimes people leave physically or emotionally without ever saying goodbye. Sometimes you simply grow out of each other, a slow, imperceptible drift, until one day you look across a vast distance you didn't even realize was forming. Sometimes the silence stretches for so long that picking up where you left off feels not just difficult, but impossible, a violation of the new reality that the silence itself has created. This is not a sign of failure. It is an intrinsic, often painful part of being human. Not every thread is meant to be tied into a neat bow. There is a profound peace to be found in no longer chasing the conclusion. The more you demand resolution from the outside world, the longer you keep the wound open and raw. The more you rehearse what you would have said, could have said, should have said, the more power that absence holds over your present reality. What if healing wasn't about finishing the story, but about releasing your need for it to be finished? You are allowed to move on without the last word. You are allowed to carry your love, or your grief, or your disappointment within you, even if no one else ever validated it. What you felt was real, even if no one else acknowledged it. Your inner experience does not require external confirmation to be legitimate. You do not need another person's signature to validate your own emotional truth. This kind of release is not an act of denial. It is an act of profound maturity. It is the conscious choice to free yourself from the prison of waiting for someone else's readiness, waiting for their apology, waiting for circumstances to magically align, waiting for the right moment to rewrite what has already been written. That waiting is a form of emotional paralysis, and it can keep you trapped for months, years, even decades. And it ends the very moment you accept that the closure you seek might never come from outside of you. It must be generated from within. What if the silence you received was the answer? What if the conversation that was never had was in itself a form of boundary? Sometimes people communicate their truth most clearly through absence, through avoidance, through a consistent choice not to engage. That doesn't make your pain any less valid, but it does invite a different kind of listening, one that doesn't demand words to understand the message. Unfinished conversations teach you to listen with your whole life, not just with your ears. They teach you to accept the difficult truth that people sometimes leave with pieces of you, and that this does not mean you are permanently broken. It simply means you are open. It means you shared a part of yourself. And sometimes that sharing was not returned in kind. That is hard, but it is also an unavoidable part of loving and living with an open heart. You can honor what you didn't get to say without needing to say it now. Some things are meant to remain unspoken, not because they weren't important, but because their purpose was served simply by existing inside of you. The unsent letter, the unsaid apology, the thought that still echoes when you hear a certain name, these are not failures. They are reminders that the heart continues its journey even when the dialogue has ended. Grief often hides in these unfinished spaces. Not just grief for people who are gone, but also grief for the versions of yourself you never got to explain or defend. The younger you who needed comfort but received judgment. The angrier you who didn't yet have the tools to speak with care. The you who stayed quiet and out of fear when you desperately wanted to speak up. It is okay to grieve for these past selves too. Sometimes the most profound form of closure is simply holding space for who you were without needing to justify it to anyone anymore. There's also a quiet dignity in no longer chasing people who have demonstrated they are not willing to meet you where you are. You do not need to force a return. You do not need to beg for understanding. If someone walked away from your life without offering you peace, you can still choose to create your own. That is not bitterness. It is a declaration of inner strength. It is choosing to water your own garden rather than waiting for someone else to bring the rain. Some of the most transformative growth happens when you stop trying to rewrite the past and start creating from the present. When you allow the unanswered questions to become part of the landscape of your history, not a flaw in the terrain that needs to be fixed. This allows you to soften around the pain. It stops being a sharp stabbing point and becomes part of the rich, complex texture of your story. There's also peace and understanding that people often cannot offer closure because they are struggling with their own unfinished stories. They may not know how to face what happened. They may lack the emotional tools to speak with clarity and accountability. They may be trapped in their own cycles of regret, shame, or confusion. Accepting this does not excuse harm. It simply frees you from the exhausting expectation that someone can give you what they never learned how to give themselves. You can forgive someone without ever hearing the words, "I'm sorry." You can find a sense of gratitude for a connection that ended in a painful silence. You can hold compassion for someone who hurt you while still maintaining firm boundaries to protect your own well-being. This delicate balance is what emotional freedom feels like. It is not needing revenge, not needing a final explanation, just breathing fully into the reality of your own life as it is now. Letting go of unfinished stories does not mean forgetting them. It means allowing them to settle into your memory without the need to drag them into your future. Some of an artist's most powerful resolutions happen in quiet, unseen ways through a cathartic piece of writing that is never shared, through a silent prayer of release, through the simple act of sitting alone with what you feel and saying to the universe, "I don't understand this, but I release it in any way." This act of release is not passive. It is an active and courageous trust. Trust that you do not need to control how everything ends. Trust that even unanswered pain can lead to profound depth. Trust that you are whole, even with a few untied threads in your tapestry. Closure is often thought of as a door slamming shut, but sometimes it is simply a breath, a pause, a quiet nod to the fact that life moved in a different direction than you expected. And this doesn't just apply to great romantic or familial ruptures. Unfinished conversations happen in friendships, in work relationships, in brief but intense connections that unexpectedly touched something deep within you. You might not even remember the last thing that was said, only the feeling of distance that followed. That too is part of this human process. Your nervous system craves resolution because it equates completion with safety. But sometimes, the deepest safety comes from teaching yourself that you can be okay even when things don't make sense, that you can still move gently and live fully even when parts of your past feel achingly incomplete. This is a kind of spiritual maturity, to walk forward without dragging behind you every unanswered question, to feel the ache of an old wound, but not let it close your heart to new experiences, to let the silence exist without allowing it to curdle into resentment. That is a strength most people never develop because it requires a kind of surrender that is not taught in most parts of our world. You may never know why someone left, why they didn't respond, why they changed, and yet you can choose to remain open. Not naive, not foolish, but open in the sense that you do not let one painful ending turn you bitter. You do not let one silence become your entire worldview. You are not defined by the words you didn't get to say. You are defined by the presence you bring to your life, now the care you show to others, and the gentleness you offer yourself when the old memories surface. That is where your real resolution lives, not in trying to make the past clean, but in bringing clarity and compassion to how you carry it forward. And sometimes the truest healing comes when you finally stop asking what it all meant. When you allow yourself to sit with the simple, stark reality that it happened, it ended. It changed you, and you are still here, still soft, still breathing, still capable of love. This is not about pretending things didn't hurt. It is about honoring what did hurt while no longer letting it shape what comes next. The story doesn't need a perfect ending. It just needs to be allowed to rest. The story may be unfinished, but but you are free to keep living fully, quietly, completely. You don't need to finish every narrative to feel whole. Some chapters close quietly, others never do. But they stop defining you the moment you stop returning to them for your sense of meaning. What matters now is how you show up in your life without needing to be the person you were when that story first began. And perhaps that leads to the next profound truth: you are not who you used to be. And in fact, you were never really a single, static version of yourself at all. The self is not a solid, immutable object. It is a process, a river, a pattern of movement. It shifts slowly, subtly, constantly. Sometimes you notice the change in big dramatic ways: a job left behind, a relationship dissolved, a single decision that rewrote the entire map of your future. But more often, you don't notice the change at all. It happens in the quiet accumulation of moments, breaths, and experiences. You are not the same person you were last week. Not in thought, not in energy, not even in the small unconscious way you carry yourself through a room. Yet most of us hold on with a desperate grip to a fixed idea of who I am. It feels safe. It gives us a label, a role, a seemingly solid shape to cling to in a world that is always moving. But that very same comfort becomes a cage when we forget that this identity is just a temporary arrangement, a composite of traits, beliefs, experiences, and habits that will continue to evolve whether we grant them permission or not. You may say, "I am the type of person who always," or "I've never been someone who could," and then proceed to shape your entire life around those sentences as if they were carved in stone. But how many of them are still true? How many were created in reaction to a person or a situation that no longer exists in your life? How many are just the faint echoes of an earlier version of you, a voice that kept repeating a story until you mistook it for a fact? The self is not a fixed object. It is a pattern of movement. And when you begin to see yourself in this way, as a fluid process rather than a static entity, everything softens. You stop boxing yourself into a restrictive role. You stop defending old, unhelpful behaviors simply out of habit. You stop feeling the exhausting need to be consistent with a version of you that no longer matches who you are now. This isn't a sign of instability. It is the hallmark of honesty. You are not your past. You are not your worst day. You are not even your best, most triumphant moment. You are whatever is unfolding in this present moment, whether that looks familiar or not. Letting go of a fixed identity does not mean you lose yourself. On the contrary, it means you finally begin to find yourself, to notice who you are emerging to be without the crushing pressure to remain the same. And that is where real freedom begins. The discomfort we feel often comes when we confuse change with loss. You feel a deep resistance when the old, familiar version of you starts to fade, because a part of you believes that you are disappearing too. But you are not disappearing. You are expanding. You are growing into new ways of being, new modes of expression, new and more nuanced truths. The former self dissolves not because you failed it, but because its purpose was fulfilled. It was a vehicle, not a destination. It was never meant to stay. It is tempting to chase definitions, especially when the world constantly demands them. What do you do? What do you believe? Who are you exactly? But these questions often ask you to reduce your vast, complex, and evolving self to what is most easily visible and categorized: your job, your political opinions, your relationship status, your history. Yet the parts of you that matter most are often the ones you cannot name so easily: your boundless curiosity, your capacity to feel deep empathy, your courageous willingness to change your mind. When you allow your own identity to move, you simultaneously stop fearing change in others. You give the people in your life the space and grace to grow. You don't lock them into your expectations of who they were last year. You stop saying, "You've changed," as if it were an accusation. Instead, it becomes a shared, celebrated reality. We all change. We all let go of who we were to make room for who we are becoming. The practice here is not to erase yourself, but to observe with gentle curiosity how tightly you hold your self-image. When you find yourself saying, "This is just who I am," notice if that statement feels like a boundary that protects you or a doorway that frees you. Is it keeping you stuck in a familiar pattern, or is it giving you space to explore? Are you using your identity to protect yourself from the discomfort of uncertainty, or to explore that uncertainty more honestly? Even your preferences, the things you think define your taste, shift over time. The music you once couldn't live without the foods you used to crave, the clothes that once felt like a second skin. These are not merely superficial changes, they are the external reflections of a much deeper internal movement. Your nervous system is constantly rewiring itself. Your brain is creating new neural pathways. Your soul is reaching in new directions. To deny that constant state of flux is to fight the very nature of being alive. There's a profound peace in recognizing that you are not obligated to be the person you were yesterday. You do not have to carry every single version of yourself forward into the present. Some of those past selves were temporary solutions to specific problems. Some were reactions to pain that you no longer have to endure. Some were created simply to survive a moment that you have already moved past. You can thank them for getting you here, and then you can let them fall away. You are allowed to begin again and again and again, as many times as you need. This perspective also helps to dissolve shame. When you see the self as fluid, your past mistakes become points on a timeline, not a permanent stain on your character. You no longer carry guilt as a fixed identity. I am a failure, but as a temporary experience that happened. I failed at something, I learned from it, and I changed. You stop defining yourself by the roles you couldn't fulfill, the relationships you couldn't save, or the ideas you couldn't hold on to. All of it becomes part of the raw material for your transformation, not evidence of your inadequacy. This shift also affects how you dream about the future. When you let your identity be soft and malleable, your future can be softer too. You don't need to know exactly what you will become. You don't need to map out every version of success. You don't need to lock yourself into a 5-year plan or a goal that might not fit the person you will be in a year. You grant yourself permission to remain curious, flexible, and responsive to the unfolding path. You will also feel less and less need to defend your past choices. When someone says, "But I thought you said you'd never," you can simply reply with quiet confidence, "That was true for me when I said it." You understand that truth is not always permanent. It is often time-based, context-based, and emotion-based. That doesn't make it a lie. It makes it part of an unfolding living story. The body is a constant reminder of this process. The way it ages, the way it responds differently to rest, to food, to stress as the years go by. You are not in control of every change, and that is not a failure. It is a powerful reminder that growth and evolution happen in ways you do not plan. The sooner you can align with that truth, the less you will suffer from resisting your own becoming. This approach to identity also reduces pressure in relationships. When you stop clinging to the person you think you should be, you allow for much more honesty in how you actually show up. You can say, "This doesn't feel right for me anymore," without the heavy weight of guilt. You can adjust. You can reintroduce yourself. You can make space for a respectful silence when no label seems to fit. Language often fails us here. The words we use to describe ourselves inevitably become outdated. Sometimes you outgrow a label long before you find a new one. That space in between, the liminal space of not knowing, can feel deeply uncertain, but it is also where the most honest and courageous living happens, between definitions, between certainties, between the need to explain. Let the self be a process, not a product. Let it be an unfolding. Let it contradict itself. Let it dissolve and rebuild. Let it pause and rest and not make sense for a while. Because the more you try to hold your identity rigidly in place, the more you limit your own becoming. There's nothing unstable about change. What is truly unstable is the deeply ingrained belief that you must stay the same to be loved, to be trusted, or to be known. But the people who truly see you and love you will honor your shifts. They will want to grow with you. They will be willing to meet you again and again as you continue to meet yourself. In many spiritual traditions, this is known as the doctrine of impermanence, or anicca. Not just the impermanence of objects or relationships, but the impermanence of the me, the personality, the voice, the belief, even the very sense of I that feels so solid and central right now. It shifts in meditation. It shifts in profound grief. It shifts in moments of awe. It shifts in sleep. There are countless moments when the sense of a fixed, separate self fades, not in a frightening way, but in a profoundly freeing one. You feel yourself as part of something larger than your personal story, something quieter than your thoughts. And in that spaciousness, there is no fixed you to protect, just awareness, just presence, just being. The more you experience this, the less tightly you will hold on to your roles. You may still play them. You may still care deeply, but you know on a fundamental level that they are temporary garments. That deep knowledge doesn't make you careless. It makes you far more compassionate. You don't need someone else to remain the same for you to love them. And you don't need to remain the same to be worthy of love. As your identity softens and you begin to embrace the fluid nature of your own being, your relationship with the past undergoes a similar transformation. When you look back, it is no longer with the same eyes. The landscape of your history, which once seemed fixed and solid, reveals itself to be as shifting and interpretive as the present. And there is no more potent catalyst for this re-seeing than the quiet act of holding an old photograph. There is a strange and powerful magic in this ritual. You hold a small, flat object, a frozen sliver of time, and it acts as a portal. At first, your attention may focus on the surface details, the outdated clothes, the youthful hairstyle, the forced or genuine smile. You might feel a pang of nostalgia for the person you were, or a sense of relief that you are no longer them. But if you stay with the image a little longer, allowing your gaze to soften, something deeper begins to unfold. You start to see not just what happened, but what was felt, what was hidden just behind the eyes, what was misunderstood by everyone in the frame, including yourself, what with the great clarifying distance of time has finally been forgiven. A photograph never changes, but you do. And so every time you look at it again, you bring a new consciousness, a new set of experiences, a new depth of understanding to the encounter. You begin to notice things you missed for years. You see the subtle tension in an expression that was masked by a cheerful pose, and you realize you were carrying a worry you didn't even know you had. You see the easy closeness in the way someone's body is angled toward another's, and you feel a belated appreciation for a bond you may have taken for granted at the time. You see the first hint of distance in a relationship, a space between two people that was imperceptible then, but seems like a vast canyon now, and you understand that the ending started long before you could name it. These small, rediscovered details carry an immense weight. They hold a new kind of meaning, not because the photo itself captures the whole truth. It never can, but because it invites you to meet your past without the heavy obligation to relive it. Memory, you discover, is not a fixed objective archive. It is a living, fluid story constantly being reshaped by your present level of awareness. When you revisit your past, you are not just recalling it. You are participating in a form of re-seeing. You are reinterpreting what mattered, what hurt, and what helped. And very often this gentle process of reshaping brings with it a quiet, unexpected kind of healing. You find yourself forgiving more easily, not only others, but also the version of yourself that simply didn't know any better. You stop demanding that your past be something other than what it was. There's a profound wisdom in realizing that what once felt like a permanent, life-defining reality now feels distant and manageable. The heartbreak that once consumed your entire world now feels like a single poignant chapter in a much longer book. The dream that didn't work out no longer stings with the same sharp sense of failure. It's not because the past has lost its importance, but because your relationship to it has fundamentally changed. This quiet shift is one of the most reliable signs of growth. Photos become mirrors for this change. You see a moment frozen in time, and what it reflects back to you is not just who you were, but how far you have come. That youthful smile may have been real, but you can now see the profound insecurity that lay just behind it. That moment may have been incredibly difficult, but you can now hold it with less resistance, seeing the strength it forged in you. The lens of the present moment brings a clarifying light to the past, and with that clarity comes a deep and lasting acceptance. You also begin to understand on a visceral level how much was left out of the frame. A photograph is a slice, a curated second, a highly edited version of reality. It cannot tell the full story of the moments before and after, the feelings left unspoken, the complex dynamics that were at play. Realizing this is incredibly freeing because it reminds you that what you once believed to be the whole truth was almost certainly not. There were feelings that were never expressed, a context you didn't yet understand, the inner lives of others that you couldn't fully see. And that humility, that admission of an incomplete perspective, opens the heart. It makes room for a more generous and compassionate interpretation of events, not just for others, but most importantly, for yourself. Sometimes the photos that once brought you unadulterated joy now bring a touch of sadness, not because the moment itself was bad, but simply because it is gone. That is the gentle grief of impermanence, the quiet universal reminder that nothing stays. But even within that grief, there's a profound tenderness. You realize that the moment mattered. You lived it fully, even if you didn't know it at the time. And now, in the act of remembering, you honor it again, not with the goal of clinging to it, but with the simple intention of recognizing its rightful place in the tapestry of your story. This is how you make peace with the passage of time, not by trying to stop it or hold on to the past, but by letting your memory breathe, by giving your past permission to evolve not in its objective facts, but in its subjective meaning for you today. Every time you look again, you are creating a new relationship with that moment. And that in itself is a quiet, ongoing form of transformation. There's also a hidden lesson in the background of every photograph. Change is always happening, even when you aren't looking. The trees behind you in that picture from 10 years ago have grown or perhaps been cut down. The street has changed. The house in the background may no longer stand. And in exactly the same way, your own inner landscape has changed. What felt like a solid, unshakable belief back then is fluid now. What was desperately urgent then may be completely irrelevant today, but none of it was wasted. Every version of you, every belief you held, every choice you made was a necessary step on the path to the person you are right now. You don't need to revisit the past to stay stuck in it, but you can choose to revisit it to understand, to integrate, and to appreciate. Sometimes looking back with conscious, compassionate awareness is the most honest way to move forward. Because when you do it from a place of presence, you stop fearing the passage of time. You stop grieving change as a form of loss and begin to see it as irrefutable evidence of a life being lived. This perspective also helps you to loosen your grip on the future. When you see with your own eyes how much you have changed, how the things that mattered so much 5 years ago no longer define you, it becomes easier to trust that what feels so uncertain and overwhelming now will one day find its place in the larger story. You don't need to figure it all out. You just need to keep growing into it one day, one breath at a time. Revisiting old photographs also softens your view of others. The people you once blamed now appear more complex, more human. You see the tired eyes you missed at the time. You see the love that was present even in the midst of a messy conflict. You see the care that wasn't always expressed clearly, but was there nonetheless. You stop needing to rewrite the past into a simple narrative of heroes and villains. You start seeing it with a wider, more compassionate lens. Some photos carry their weight because of who is missing, faces that are no longer here, places you can never return to. You may never stop missing them. But even that ache transforms over time. It becomes less like a chain holding you down and more like a delicate thread woven into the fabric of who you are. A memory that lives gently within you, not as a constantly reopening wound, but as a treasured part of your inner landscape. And then there's the photo you didn't take, the one you missed, the moment you were living so fully, so completely, that you forgot to document it. And that in its own way is a treasure. Not everything needs to be saved to be real. Not every joy needs a frame. Some moments belong only to the heart, and you carry them not on your phone or in an album, but in the subtle and profound ways they changed you. Looking back with new eyes also helps you to reclaim the parts of yourself you may have abandoned along the way. The creativity you let go of in the name of practicality. The softness you had before the world taught you to be hard. The sense of wonder you forgot you once held so easily. These pieces of you are not lost forever. They are simply waiting to be remembered, to be invited back into your life. Not so you can become who you were, but so you can carry forward what still matters into the person you are becoming. This practice is not about indulging in nostalgia. It is not about pretending the past was better than it was. It is about honesty and wholeness. It is about seeing all of it, the joy, the confusion, the beauty, the loss with equal care, letting it all sit beside you like an old familiar friend. Not pulling you back, but gently reminding you of the rich, complex, and beautiful journey that has shaped you. Time is not an enemy. It is a mirror. It reflects your own becoming. And when you learn to meet it with openness, you realize you don't need to go back. You just need to go deeper into the present, into what is real now, into the quiet awareness that everything passes. And that is precisely what gives it all its value. If even your past is not a fixed monument, but a story you learn to re-see with new eyes, then perhaps the things you create, the marks you try to leave on the world, are subject to the same gentle law of impermanence. Maybe the ultimate beauty is found not in the lasting memory of the creation, but in the sacred presence of the making. Maybe what you build is not for keeping, but for offering, and once it is given, it is destined to return to the same deep silence from which it came. This silence is not a loss. It is a teacher, a space where you begin to understand that the true art of living is not about achieving permanence, but about mastering the grace of participation. There's an ancient and profound practice where this truth is made exquisitely visible. In the quiet halls of monasteries, monks spend days, sometimes weeks, creating intricate sand mandalas. They are patterns of impossible precision, breathtaking in their complexity and beauty. Grain by grain, using slender metal funnels, they shape a vibrant cosmos of colored sand. Color by color, detail by detail, they pour their entire focus, their unwavering presence, their collective intention into something magnificent. And then, when it is finally complete, when its beauty is at its absolute peak, they perform the final, most crucial part of the ritual. They sweep it all away. With a few deliberate gestures, the intricate design is dismantled. The colors are mixed into a uniform gray, and the sand is poured into a nearby river or stream, returning to the world. To an outside observer, this might seem like a tragic waste, a senseless destruction of beauty. But for the monks, this act is not one of disrespect. It is the ultimate expression of reverence. Reverence for impermanence. Reverence for the profound truth that nothing is meant to last forever. Reverence for what it means to create without clinging. The ritual is not about the final product. It is about the process. The true art is not in the mandala itself, but in the quality of attention brought to its creation and its dissolution. You build knowing it will end. You give your focus, your care, your creative energy not for the sake of a lasting impact, but for the sacredness of the act itself. This is the practice of non-attachment at its highest and most beautiful level. It is not a rejection of beauty, but a way to hold it with open hands, to understand that the purpose of creating is not to preserve, but to express. And when the expression is finished, you bow and you let it go. That is the essence of the mandala, and it serves as a powerful mirror for the way we are all invited to live. Nothing we make is meant to stay. To live this way means building your life like a sand mandala. You pour your heart into your work, your love, your relationships, your art. You show up fully. You do it with meticulous care and unwavering presence, but you simultaneously release your attachment to the outcome. You stop measuring the value of your efforts by how long they last or how many people applaud them. You start to see the intrinsic worth in the temporary, in the moment of connection, in the act of giving. You realize that beauty is not reduced by its impermanence. It is in fact defined and amplified by it. This way of being fundamentally changes your relationship with effort. You no longer work solely for future recognitions or reward. You create because it is your nature to create. You serve because serving aligns with your deepest values, not because it will ensure you are praised or remembered. You give not to be immortalized, but simply because the act of giving feels true in the moment. Your actions become less about controlling an outcome and more about participating in a flow. The practice of non-clinging, as demonstrated by the mandala, is not a form of cold detachment. It is a radical form of presence. It is the ability to give your full, undivided attention to something while simultaneously knowing that you will not get to keep it. This applies to everything, to the projects you pour your soul into, to the people you love more than life itself, to the moments of perfect joy, and even to the parts of yourself that you know will not come back. When you can embrace this, you stop trying to make life hold still for you. You become more fluid, more present, more gentle. You still build relationships, you still pursue dreams, and you still share what matters most to you. But you no longer panic when things shift. You no longer collapse when something comes to an end because you know on a foundational level that it was never supposed to last forever. It was supposed to be honored while it was here. This mindset also softens the experience of grief, not by removing it, but by changing its shape. When something you love dissolves a relationship, a season of your life, a role you cherished, you still feel the profound ache of its absence. But underneath the ache, you can also see the grace. You know that it served its purpose. You remember that it was created like the mandala, with care, with beauty, and with intention. And you know that its story is now complete with its release. You also stop fearing failure in the same way. If everything is ultimately destined to dissolve, then the concept of a permanent catastrophic failure loses its terrifying grip. You try things, you learn, you create, and when it doesn't work out, or when it's time for it to end, you sweep the sand and you begin again. Not because the previous attempt didn't matter, but because starting again is an intrinsic part of the sacred cycle. Each attempt carries wisdom. Each effort is part of a deeper unfolding pattern that was never meant to be frozen in time. Living like this invites a deep and abiding humility. You stop pretending that you can control the grand arc of your life. You stop trying to freeze what is meant to move. Instead, you become someone who touches the world lightly, but fully. Someone who leaves behind not a heavy permanent imprint, but many light, meaningful moments of presence. And this is not just about creating formal art. It's about how you relate to every single area of your life. Your relationships are a kind of living mandala. They are formed through the intricate layering of shared time, shared care, and shared energy. And then inevitably they change, they dissolve. People drift or grow apart or pass on. This doesn't mean the connection failed. It means it completed its unique and beautiful shape. Even your own thoughts form patterns like sand. You focus, you gather information, you shape your understanding of a situation. And then something shifts, a new experience, a new piece of information, a new question, and the old pattern dissolves. If you are wise, you don't resist. You let it fall apart, and you begin again building a new, more nuanced understanding. This also applies to your identity. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago. Even now, in this very moment, you are forming a new version of yourself through your choices, your experiences, and your level of presence. And at some point, this version of you will also dissolve to make way for the next. This is not something to mourn. It is something to embrace with wonder. You are an unfolding dynamic design, not static, not fixed, always changing, always reforming. The wisdom of the mandala lives in every natural cycle. Flowers bloom with extravagant beauty, and then they fall. Waves rise to a majestic peak, and then they break upon the shore. Stars appear in the night sky, and then they vanish. This rhythm is not a problem to be solved. It is a truth to be lived by, and the more you can align your own life with this fundamental rhythm, the less resistance and therefore less suffering you will feel. Resistance shows up when you try to make things permanent, when you hold on too tightly, when you believe that something must stay for it to have been real or valuable. But the mandala teaches that the deepest and most real things in life often leave no physical trace at all. A shared glance of understanding, a moment of profound silence, a single shared breath. You don't need external proof that something mattered. Its presence was its meaning. This understanding shifts your focus from outcomes to intentions. You start caring more about how you create, not just what you create. Were you kind? Were you honest? Were you present? Did you offer something of yourself even knowing it wouldn't last? These are the questions that shape a life built on the foundation of sacred impermanence. You begin to notice how this approach changes your nervous system too. When you stop clinging, you stop bracing for impact. Your body physically relaxes. Your breath deepens. You are no longer trying to outrun loss. You are learning how to live inside its truth with peace and with grace. Even love becomes more expansive. You stop loving people with the intention of keeping them. You love them simply because you can, because it feels true, because that love itself is the beautiful, intricate pattern you are shaping grain by grain. And when the wind of time comes and the form changes, you don't hold a grudge. You bow, you thank the moment for its beauty, and you let it go. This is not passive living. It is the most deeply engaged way to live. But your engagement is rooted in presence, not in possession. You become someone who shows up fully, but doesn't grasp. Someone who builds astonishing beauty and then blesses its disappearance. Someone who honors creation and just as deeply honors its inevitable return to formlessness. And when you face loss again, as you surely will feel it deeply. But it will not break you in the same way, because you will know the pattern. You will know that this is what sand does. It holds a shape for a time, and then it returns. And that returning is not an erasure, it is a release. Letting go of what you create, like the sand mandala, frees your heart from the need to be seen, for your work to be real. You learn to build with care, even knowing it will all vanish. This same profound truth applies not only to what you offer the world, but to how the world receives both you and your offerings. No matter how carefully you live, how gently you speak, or how sincerely you try, some people will still misunderstand you. Your intentions will be misread, your silence will be misinterpreted, your words will be twisted. And when that happens, your peace depends not on the exhausting work of clearing your name, but on the quiet internal practice of learning to let those echoes fade. Being misunderstood hurts. It stings not just because someone has gotten the facts wrong, but because it touches on a deep, primal human longing to be known, to be seen accurately, to have our inner reality reflected back to us with clarity and compassion. When that reflection is distorted, when your intentions are questioned, or your heart is fundamentally misread, it is easy to feel exposed, dismissed, or entirely unseen. But what if this painful experience, as isolating as it feels, holds a hidden gift? What if it is an invitation to ground yourself in a truth that is deeper than public opinion? Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Not every judgment needs to be addressed. Sometimes the most powerful and dignified response is to remain steady, quiet, and deeply rooted in what you know to be true within yourself. Because most judgments are temporary. They rise quickly, with a great deal of noise and energy, and then they fade just as fast. Like echoes in a canyon, they sound loud and all-encompassing for a moment, but they inevitably dissolve into the vastness of silence. When someone misjudges you, the immediate reflexive instinct is to explain, to defend, to fix the distorted image, to set the record straight. But more often than not, this only amplifies the noise and deepens the entanglement. You pour your precious life energy into trying to control something that is by its very nature uncontrollable in another person's perception. And in doing so, you often lose your own center. You become caught up in a draining battle with a version of you that only exists in someone else's mind. Peace begins the moment you recognize and accept the limits of being understood. Even the people who are closest to you, who love you most dearly, will never fully know the entire landscape of your inner world. They can love you, support you, and try their best to hear you, but they are still seeing you through their own unique filter, a filter shaped by their own past, their own fears, their own assumptions, just as yours is. This doesn't mean that deep connection is impossible. It simply means that perfect 100% clarity between two people is always partial, and that misunderstanding is not necessarily a sign of failure. It is a natural, unavoidable part of human interaction. You cannot control how others hear your words, but you can control how tightly you grip their interpretation. The moment you stop needing everyone to get it, you free yourself. You return to your own center of gravity. You stop chasing external validation and begin the more rewarding work of living from a deeper place, from self-trust, from quiet alignment with your own values. And in that grounded space, you begin to see the misunderstanding not as a personal wound, but as an impersonal wave. It rises, it breaks upon the shore of your awareness, and then it recedes. This shift is especially powerful when the misunderstanding is sharp and painful, when someone assigns motives to you that you simply do not recognize, when your thoughtful silence is labeled as cold indifference, when your kindness is mistaken for weakness or manipulation. In those moments, the urge to defend your character can be overwhelming, but often the more you try to explain, the more you feel erased. The simple truth of who you are becomes secondary to the complex, distorted story that someone else has decided to tell about you. In time, you learn that stillness is not the same as surrender. It is a form of clarity. It is a powerful refusal to be pulled into a storm that is not yours. You can choose to stand in your own knowing, to let your consistent actions speak louder than frantic words, to let the passage of time clarify what a single conversation cannot. Most people don't need to be convinced, they simply need to watch. And over time, they will often come to see what they couldn't see in the heat of the moment. But even if they don't, you can survive that. You can remain whole, even in the face of being profoundly misread, because your worth is not located in someone else's understanding of you. It is not measured by how accurately other people are able to describe you. Your worth lives in how you treat others and how you stay true to your own values in the face of pressure, and in how gently you continue to move through the world, even when you have been misjudged. This is where true spiritual maturity grows, in the space where you can allow others to be wrong about you without letting that experience harden your heart. You don't make yourself smaller to avoid being misunderstood. You don't become louder and more aggressive just to correct the record. You simply stay open. You stay honest, and you keep walking your path. The truth is, everyone has been misunderstood. Everyone has felt the sting of being unseen. And those moments, while painful, can become profound invitations to return inward to clarify not for the world, but for yourself. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I know to be true about myself when no one agrees? There's a quiet, unshakable peace that blooms when you no longer need external agreement to feel grounded in your own reality. It is steady. It doesn't shout. It knows that misunderstanding comes and goes just as applause does. Neither should define your path. Neither should be allowed to control your precious energy. This practice also deepens compassion. You begin to see with painful clarity all the times that you too have misunderstood others. You have heard things with ears clouded by your own emotions. You have judged someone without knowing their full story. You have created simple narratives about complex people that later turned out to be wildly incomplete. And this self-awareness softens your response to others. You stop blaming them for being human. You allow for a sacred space to exist between their reaction and your response. Misunderstandings do not automatically mean a relationship must end. Sometimes they can be a catalyst for deeper, more honest conversations. Sometimes they invite a level of truth-telling that had previously been buried, but this can only happen if both people are willing to step out of their stories and into a space of genuine curiosity. And when they are not, you learn the difficult but necessary art of walking away without bitterness. Not because it didn't matter, but because you have outgrown the need to be fully seen by everyone in order to feel whole. The greatest freedom comes when you realize that even if someone forgets you, mislabels you, or completely writes you out of their version of the story, none of that can erase the integrity of your own choices and intentions. You know what you meant, you know what you gave, and that inner knowing does not require an audience to be valid. This also changes how you show up in more public spaces, whether it's at work or online. You begin to speak more freely. You stop endlessly editing your truth just to avoid potential criticism. You realize that no matter how careful you are, or no matter how perfectly you phrase something, someone somewhere will misinterpret it. And so you stop shrinking. You tell your truth not with the aim of controlling the response, but with the simple aim of staying in alignment with who you are. This is not the same as becoming careless with your words. It is the opposite. You become more responsible, more thoughtful, more present, because you are no longer performing for an imagined audience. You are speaking to express, not to impress. And that shift creates an honesty that others can feel even if they can't always articulate it. Over time, you come to realize that being misunderstood is not something to be feared. It is something to be worked with. It teaches you detachment. It teaches you to speak your truth clearly and then to let it go. It teaches you to ground your sense of worth in your own actions, not in others' approval. And slowly, your fear of being misread becomes less sharp, less personal, more like the weather. You still care, but you don't carry the weight of it in the same way. You respond when it feels right, and you learn to stay silent when it doesn't. You come to trust that the totality of your life will speak louder and more truthfully than any single opinion ever could. And when all the noisy echoes finally fade, what remains is not who they said you were, but who you became by moving through it all with grace. A note fades, a story ends, an echo dissolves into silence, and what is left is not emptiness, but a vast and quiet space of meaning. This is how life moves through phases, through quiet shifts, through roles that come and go, like movements in a grand, unseen symphony. As you learn to listen to your life in this way, you come to the most fundamental truth of all, a truth your body has been telling you with every moment of its existence. You arrive at the breath. In the profound simplicity of your own breathing, all the teachings of impermanence converge into a single felt reality. The breath enters, the breath leaves, and in its ceaseless, humble rhythm, it tells a story that cannot be ignored. You are not permanent, and that in itself is the ultimate gift. Every inhale is a beginning. It arrives, it fills you, and then it disappears. Every exhale is an ending, a release of what the body no longer needs. This cycle repeats itself thousands of times a day, without force, without ownership, and without attachment. You cannot hold on to a breath. The moment you try, you begin to suffer. You suffocate. You are reminded immediately and viscerally that release is not optional. It is a biological and spiritual requirement for life. The breath shows you with every single movement that life does not function by accumulating, but by flowing. You receive and you let go. You are filled and you are emptied, and in that constant exchange, you are alive. Each time you exhale, something dies. Not in a dramatic, tragic way, but in a soft, constant, and utterly natural way. Each completed breath marks the irrevocable passing of time, the changing of cells, the unrepeatable rhythm of the now. Most of the time, we are not aware of it. Breathing happens in the background of our lives, an autonomous function we take for granted until it becomes difficult. But in the moments when we do choose to notice it, when we bring our full gentle awareness to the rise and fall of the chest, we begin to understand something profound. This simple biological act is the most consistent and intimate reminder of impermanence we are ever given. The breath is always leaving us, and yet we never stop beginning again. This pattern is a perfect miniature reflection of life and death. It invites an awareness not of mortality as a distant, terrifying event, but as something woven into the very fabric of our present moment. Each breath is a small mirror of our own mortality. It reminds us that everything we experience, without exception, has a start and an end. The people we love, the feelings we cherish, the moments that move us to tears or laughter, none of them are fixed. None can be held longer than their allotted time. The breath does not argue with this truth. It embodies it. It teaches you how to be here fully, without needing to grasp, without needing to possess what will not stay. And once you begin to feel your breath in this way, you begin to feel everything in this way. You no longer take the next moment for granted. You no longer assume there will always be another opportunity to say what you mean, to show how you feel, to begin the thing you have been waiting to start. The breath gently reminds you that procrastination is a form of illusion, a denial of the fleeting nature of now. The now is the only place where anything real can ever happen. This awareness creates a sense of urgency, but it is not the urgency of panic. It is the urgency of clarity. You begin to sense with an intuitive precision what matters most, not from a place of pressure, but from a place of deep peace. The breath becomes your compass. It constantly leads you back to simplicity, to stillness, to honesty. It helps you to see through the endless distractions. It helps you to finally hear what your own life has been quietly asking of you all along. And because the breath is always with you, this profound reminder is always available. You don't need a special practice, a quiet room, or a specific time of day. You only need to stop to notice and to feel the movement, to feel it rise, peak, and fall over and over again, without rush, without delay. Even the moments that feel impossibly hard, fear, loss, uncertainty, become more bearable when you meet them with your breath. Not because the feeling magically disappears, but because you now have a rhythm, an anchor to hold on to within the storm. You can breathe through what feels overwhelming. You can soften into what you cannot fix. The breath does not need your circumstances to change. It only needs you to stay present with it. This kind of embodied awareness creates a deep, grounded courage. You begin to accept that death is not a failure. It is simply the natural shape of things. It is the closing of what once opened, the final exhale after a lifetime of inhales, the ending that gives the entire experience its precious meaning. Every great spiritual tradition speaks of the breath not because it is mystical or esoteric, but because it is utterly real and universally available. It brings the wandering mind back from its travels through past and future. It steadies the trembling body. It reminds you that being alive is not about how long you last, but about how fully you are able to meet each passing, unrepeatable moment. This rhythm also reveals the final truth about control. You did not choose your first breath, and you will not choose your last. But between those 2 points, you are given countless precious chances to simply meet what is, not to master it, not to perfect it, but just to meet it with your full, open-hearted presence. When you truly feel the profound impermanence of your own breath, you begin to value the ordinary, the small, the fleeting in a way you never have before. You begin to feel a sense of reverence for the moments that pass without announcement, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the sound of someone you love laughing in the other room, the deep, quiet stillness just before you fall asleep. You stop waiting for the big, cinematic experiences to feel alive. You stop demanding more than this. The breath brings you into a state of gratitude, not through intellectual ideas, but through direct physical embodiment. When you feel your breath moving in and out of your body, you remember that you are still here, that this moment is not guaranteed, that this simple act is sacred. Gratitude, you realize, does not require a list. It only requires attention. It requires an awareness of the gift you have been given, even as it is constantly slipping away. This presence is not about stillness alone. It is about a movement that carries meaning. The breath reminds you that conscious action doesn't need to be rushed, that silence doesn't mean nothing is happening, and that sometimes the most transformative moments of our lives come quietly in the spaces between the things we thought mattered most. You also learn that not in every breath will feel easy. Some will be shallow with fear. Some will be tight with anxiety. Some will be interrupted by sobs of grief. And all of this is part of the truth. You don't have to make the breath perfect. You only have to stay with it. You only have to allow it to be what it is in this moment. Over time, this becomes your baseline for awareness. You begin to see everything through the clarifying lens of impermanence, not as a threat, but as a teacher. A loved one hugs you, and you feel the moment more deeply because you know it won't last. You sit with someone in their pain, and you stay more present because you know this too will shift. You stop needing to fix everything. You start simply to be with. The unparalleled beauty of the breath is in its simplicity. It does not argue, it does not demand. It continues whether you pay attention to it or not. And when you do choose to pay attention, it reveals more truth than 1,000 books ever could. It becomes a doorway to understanding not just the body, but the entire fleeting, precious experience of living. You begin to see how much you have missed while rushing, how many breaths were taken without noticing how much of your own life has slipped by while you were mentally elsewhere. And instead of feeling guilt, you feel a quiet, profound gratitude, because now you are returning. Now you are listening. Now you are here. Mortality is not a curse. It is clarity. It is the dark velvet frame that gives shape and brilliance to every joy, every lesson, and every connection. Without it, nothing would matter. Without it, endings, beginnings would hold no weight. So when you feel overwhelmed by the speed of life or the weight of your own uncertainty, return to the simple, profound truth. Your breath is always here. It is your anchor, your teacher, and your most honest mirror. Each inhale a reminder of arrival. Each exhale a practice and surrender. And when your final breath comes, whenever that day may be, it will not feel like a punishment or a failure. It will simply be the final natural rhythm in a song that has always known how to begin and how to end. You will not need to fight it. You will have been practicing for it with every conscious breath your entire life. And until then, you breathe with attention, with presence, with quiet awe at how something so small, so simple, so fleeting can possibly hold everything.